Nowadays, anabolic steroids and bodybuilding seem almost inseparable, but how and when exactly did this happen?
It's not a healthy thing to do, but it's being used.
Did you take them?
I take them.
Some Valley doctors see kids as young as 13 using steroids.
The designer steroid named Tren.
Research shows that more people use anabolic steroids than heroin. In fact, steroids are becoming some of the most popular drugs out there.
Today, we're going to be going down the rabbit hole of anabolic history to try and figure out when exactly bodybuilders started using steroids. There's no question about Arnold and other golden era bodybuilders using steroids, but the gray area comes in the silver era. The 1940s and 50s produced incredible legendary physiques like Steve Reeves, John Grimek, George Eiferman, Leroy Colbert, Marvin Eder, and many others. But were these guys natural? Were steroids even available to them? Well, let's get into it.
Ooh, and I'm taking a steroid to heaven.
We know that all anabolic steroids are derivatives of testosterone, and testosterone was first synthesized in 1935. It was achieved nearly simultaneously by Adolf Butenandt in Germany and Leopold Ruzicka in Switzerland. This discovery earned both men a joint Nobel Prize in chemistry. Now, whenever you bring this up, you will inevitably get comments claiming that it doesn't actually matter because people were isolating or extracting testosterone in other ways before it was synthesized. Essentially, you have people saying that there were steroids before 1935. I've already made a whole video on this specific topic, but I'll just quickly go over it again now. People have been using animal testicles for millennia to create all sorts of pills, powders, and potions. Usually they were attempting to treat symptoms of hypogonadism and impotence, but also some thought that it would improve strength, so it could be used as a performance enhancer. The logic was simple. They knew that eunuchs, castrated men, were infertile and usually had less strength, less muscle mass, and had a low sex drive. So clearly they would have known that something important was going on in the testicles, and there would be many attempts to harness their powers. However, the issue is that testicles produce testosterone, but they do not store it. So there is actually very little testosterone in testicles. And on top of that, whatever tiny amount of testosterone these testicle extracts had didn't even matter because when ingested orally, testosterone gets inactivated by our livers. So basically, all of this is to say that the attempts to create steroids before 1935 simply did not work. They were placebos. Sure, they were marketed and sold, but even to this day you have people selling all sorts of supplements which do absolutely nothing. Another one you'll find a lot of people referencing is this Brown-Séquard Elixir, which was sold all over the world in the late 1800s. It was even used by a famous baseball player named Jim Galvin in 1889. The elixir was made from all sorts of animal fluids and was meant to be injected. This was marketed as a remedy for almost anything and also claimed to increase strength. But once again, this elixir was later proven to be nothing more than a placebo. People will also bring up other drugs from this era, stimulants like cocaine or methamphetamine, and sure, these were available before steroids. But come on guys, there's nothing anabolic about these drugs. Maybe you can call them the forbidden pre-workout, but it's not gonna do anything to build muscle, and in fact would likely be detrimental to a bodybuilder. It wasn't until the early 1930s that anything resembling a steroid was actually isolated. So before he figured out how to synthesize testosterone, Adolf Butenandt managed to isolate a tiny amount of androsterone from 15,000 liters of urine. Androsterone is a steroid hormone, but it's very weak with only 1/7 the potency of testosterone. and the tiny amount he was able to produce wasn't nearly enough to study in humans. It wasn't until 1934 when a Dutch group of scientists managed to isolate just 10 milligrams of testosterone from 100 kilos of bull testicles. So there were some absolutely minuscule amounts of these hormones being produced by researchers in the early 1930s. But there's simply no chance that any athletes were benefiting from them. This is why we can consider anyone from before 1935 to be 100% natural without a shadow of a doubt. All the Bronze Era greats, George Hackenschmidt, Eugene Sandow, Otto Arco, Maxique, Bobby Pandour, and many more, did not have access to anything which could be considered an anabolic steroid. Alright, so what happens next? They finally figure out how to make testosterone in 1935. So does that mean bodybuilders immediately began sticking needles in their butts? Well, no, it's not quite so simple. It was still ineffective when taken orally and only had a half-life of 10 minutes when injected. It would take years for testosterone to be properly studied, understood, and manufactured. Over the next few years, scientists started synthesizing various esters of testosterone, like testosterone propionate and testosterone enanthate, which proved to be much more effective due to their longer half-lives. They also developed methyl testosterone, which was the first orally effective testosterone preparation, so it could be taken in pills rather than injections. However, it's not quite so clear when these drugs became widely available to the public. It's certainly safe to say that it wasn't any time in the 1930s, since testosterone was only being used in experimental clinical trials. It was being studied as a medicine for sick and old men, so it's extremely unlikely that any bodybuilder would have made his way into one of these early trials. So I started looking through some old newspaper archives to try and figure out when exactly testosterone hit the market. Interestingly, I found another factor at play which muddies the waters even further. You see, there was a lot of publicity surrounding the discovery of testosterone, and it seems like companies wanted to cash in even if they didn't have anything to offer. Like, take a look at this newspaper advertisement from 1943. They're selling a product called Testosterone, and they claim it contains hormones. They don't specify which hormones, but we can clearly see what they're implying with a name like Testosterone. You could be excused for thinking this means testosterone was readily available in the early 1940s, but now take a look at this. It turns out that this company got in trouble with the FDA in 1945 for being misleading with their labels. This document gives us the ingredients of the product, and we can see it contains 0.05 grams of something called an orchic substance, which is, drumroll please, made from cow testicles. And just like we discussed earlier, the FDA says here that it does nothing when taken orally. So again, we're back to the placebos. And when we take a look at an advertisement for Testosterone in 1948, after the FDA won in court, the ad now only talks about vitamins and makes no mention of hormones. So all of this is to say that it's actually very difficult to pinpoint when testosterone became available to the public. Even though we can find advertisements for products claiming to have hormones or testosterone, it's impossible to know what was actually in them. Another often repeated anecdote is that German soldiers were given testosterone to boost their performance during World War II. But there's simply no evidence for this. They certainly used drugs, but testosterone was not one of them, and there's an excellent article in the International Journal of the History of Sport which thoroughly debunks this myth. In 1945, a book called The Male Hormone was published by a doctor named Paul de Kruis. The book spoke very positively of testosterone, and many people like to throw this out there as evidence of bodybuilders using testosterone. The only problem with this theory is that the book makes no mention of anabolic properties, athletic performance, or anything like that. Once again, it's pushing testosterone as a medicine for old and sick men. We have to try and see it from their point of view. Nowadays, everyone clearly associates testosterone with bodybuilding, strength, and steroids. But back then, it was just a new experimental medicine. Even the word testosterone was just a couple years old. When the book mentions strength, it's more like the strength of urination improving in old men, rather than the strength to lift a barbell, for example. The one and only mention to anything related to sports comes almost at the very end of the book. There's a short paragraph saying, quote, "We know both the St. Louis Cardinals and St. Louis Browns have won championships supercharged by vitamins. It would be interesting to watch the productive power of an industry or a professional group that would try a systematic supercharge with testosterone." De Grief makes no claims or recommendations for testosterone as a performance enhancer. And I think it's a bit of a stretch to claim that this book would have resonated in any way with bodybuilders of the time just because of this one sentence, when otherwise the entire book is dedicated to promoting testosterone as a medicine for sick old men. In any case, sometime after this book was published, there were some more legit-looking advertisements for testosterone in newspapers. Testosterone pills would have been easily accessible to anyone wanting to buy them. But again, take a look at how it's being advertised. This one says, "Feeling old before your time? Nervous and washed out? Revitalize your system with testosterone." I just can't imagine this would get some young, healthy, and strong bodybuilder excited. The connection between testosterone and its performance-enhancing properties simply wasn't there yet. But it must be said that if someone wanted to make a case for bodybuilders using testosterone, I reckon the late 1940s is about the earliest it would make any kind of sense. Though I was not able to find any evidence of bodybuilders using testosterone in the 1940s. Of course, all of this is just speculation based on the existence and availability of testosterone. So when do we have actual evidence of bodybuilders using this stuff? Well, the year is 1954 and the Soviets are dominating the World Weightlifting Championships in Vienna. Witnessing this is a man named John Bosley Ziegler, the doctor of the American team. Dr. Ziegler noticed the Russian athletes looked suspiciously hairy and oversized. Ziegler invited the Russian team doctor to a local tavern, and the two began drinking together. As the saying goes, in vino veritas, and after a couple drinks and repeatedly getting asked what the hell these Russians were taking, the Soviet doctor finally revealed that his athletes were being given testosterone. Of course, the anabolic effects of testosterone explain the exceptional strength and size of the Russian athletes, and the androgenic effects explain the unusual amount of body hair. Upon returning home, Ziegler started experimenting with testosterone injections, both on himself and on several members of Bob Hoffman's York Barbell Club, including retired John Grimek. However, the results weren't great. The athletes didn't notice much strength gains, and there were many unpleasant side effects. Ziegler knew he had to figure something out if he wanted his team to have a chance against the chemically enhanced Soviets. So he started working with the CIBA pharmaceutical company to develop a drug which had less androgenic effects than testosterone while keeping the anabolic properties. In 1958, CIBA Pharmaceuticals released their new creation, meth androsterone, which the company marketed as Dianabol. Once the York Barbell crew started using this new drug, the results were incredible and word quickly got around. By the early 1960s, weightlifters and bodybuilders were clamoring for Dr. Ziegler's mysterious pink pills. And while Ziegler only ever prescribed Dianabol in small doses, many lifters were already starting to abuse the drug in an effort to gain an edge over the competition, often with horrific consequences. Ziegler himself developed heart disease due to his experimentation with steroids, and he died of heart failure in 1983, at just 63 years old. He even condemned his invention before he died, but it was too late. Dianabol and other steroids had completely taken over bodybuilding and many other sports. From the late 1950s and especially from the 1960s onward, it's safe to assume that essentially all competitive bodybuilders were using steroids. Just take a look at these muscle builder magazines. On the left, we have Steve Reeves in 1954, looking amazing and perfectly natural. Then on the right, we have Hugo Labra in 1964. It's clear to see that something happened in those 10 years. The bodybuilders just got so much bigger and leaner, and it only got worse from there. Here's Sergio Oliva on the cover of Muscle Builder in 1968, looking absolutely freaky. And of course, this continues to this day, over 60 years later. So to quickly summarize, the Bronze Era anytime before the 1930s can be considered 100% natural. It's not even up for debate because steroids simply did not exist. There are many excellent physiques from this era, and I will continue to cover them in depth on this channel. From the late 1950s onward, steroids rapidly took over the iron game, and essentially all golden era bodybuilders can be presumed not natural. There is a small gray area between the late 1940s and mid-1950s, when testosterone was readily available in pharmacies and through the mail, but it was being prescribed as a medicine for sick old men and was not yet understood to be a performance enhancer for athletes. It cannot be entirely ruled out that athletes would have experimented with testosterone during this time, but I found no solid evidence to indicate that they did. And I will continue covering bodybuilding history up to the early 1950s on this channel. I hope you found this video informative. If you're new to the channel and are not sure what I mean by bronze, silver, and golden eras of bodybuilding, I recommend you check out the video on your screen now where I explain it in depth. You can also check out my old school bodybuilding playlist for all my videos covering the bronze and silver eras. A massive thank you to my patrons on Patreon, link below if you want to sign up for early ad-free access to these videos. Thank you for watching and see you next time.